Hi, everybody. Welcome to my homestead and welcome to my channel. My name is Jared. The Times of Israel. On the eve of Tisha BAv, Israel risks an unforgivable process of self-destruction. What is Tisha BAv? We're going to look at that. This is one of the days that the Jews observe on the Hebrew calendar. Does it have anything to do with the Second Coming? We're going to explore that, and I'm going to show you some pretty interesting things. Okay, when is this coming up? This is going to be at sundown on the 26th, which is next Wednesday, and then the full day of it is going to be on the 27th. So, could something interesting happen on this day? And the reason why I would even explore this, as I've said many times before, and it's been a while since I've really done any Jewish feast day videos. Now, this is not a feast day, but it is a day that they observe. It's a special day on their calendar. Yeah, but we know that with the feast days, Elijah showed up at the Kirtland Temple on first fruits, and Joseph Smith received the gold plates on the Feast of Trumpets, also known as Rosh Hashanah. So it would seem that the Lord still takes these days into account. Does he with Tisha BAv? I don't know, but like I said, I'm going to show you a few things to consider. Before we do that, here's the update on the Book of Mormon sharing challenge, or the hashtag Flood the Earth challenge. We're at 6,161 copies of the Book of Mormon and 619 people that have joined the challenge so far. Please consider doing so. All you have to do is share the Book of Mormon and then put in the comments or in an email how many copies of the Book of Mormon you shared. And this all started because Elder Razban's talk in a general conference, the talk called This Day, he mentioned how you can use the Gospel Library app. Go to Scriptures, and at the top there's a button that says Share Now. Click on this, text it, email it, direct message, or however you want to send it. It's a specific Book of Mormon app for people that are not members of the church. It's just the Book of Mormon. So please do this. There's no excuse not to send it to people. It's never been easier. And you can do it literally right now, really quick. The channel goal is at least sharing 10. So try and hit that goal. And then before we get into the video, another thing, a lot of people were commenting on my videos yesterday that Sister Holland had passed away. This is Elder Jeffrey R. Holland's wife. And I just wanted to acknowledge that. And it's very sad because I recently watched her in it was a devotional. I think it was a youth devotion or a young adult devotional. Anyway, let me just show you some highlights here. Patricia Terry Holland, the wife of Elder Jeffrey R. Holland of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles and a former counselor in the Young Women General Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, passed away peacefully on July 20th, 2023. So that was yesterday, after a brief hospitalization. She was 81. So here she is. There they are. Their marriage photo. And so prayers for Elder Holland and their family. It's very sad. She seemed like she was very sweet. They were married on June 7th, 1963, in the St. George, Utah temple following a 5-year courtship. She and Jeffrey had 3 children, Matthew, Mary, Alice, and David, and 13 grandchildren and 5 great-grandchildren. Let's see. And that's all that I have for that. So just wanted to make you aware in case you didn't know. Okay, so yeah, Tisha BAv coming up at sundown next Wednesday. All right, could something significant happen on that day? Well, okay, first, what is Tisha BAv if you don't know? So first, I'm going to look at the Hebrew calendar website, its explanation of it, but we'll get deeper into it. Okay, so Tisha BAv, in Hebrew, the 9th of Av is a month on the Hebrew calendar, is an annual fast day, not feast, but fast day in Judaism, named after the 9th day, Tisha, of the month of Av in the Hebrew calendar. The fast commemorates the destruction of both the first temple and second temple in Jerusalem, which occurred about 655 years apart, but on the same Hebrew calendar date. Tisha BAv is never observed on Shabbat. If the 9th of Av falls on a Saturday, the fast is postponed until the 9th of Av or the 10th of Av. And I think that was the case last year. I want to say that that's what happened last year. There was like some special instructions and stuff what you're supposed to do. Okay, so going to Chabad.org, what is Tisha BAv? Tisha BAv, the 9th day of the month of Av, is the saddest day on the Jewish calendar, on which we fast, deprive ourselves, and pray. It is the culmination of the 3 weeks, a period of time during which we mark the destruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. So that's really saying something. It's the saddest day, and it's because the temple was destroyed. You know, Yom Kippur, that's the holiest day of the year, and that typically is in September or October. Well, this is the saddest day of the year, and it has to do with the destruction of both temples. So you can see where this is kind of getting interesting as we think about the second coming. We think about the temple in Jerusalem that will be, right? Let me just read a few more things. Okay, 1313 before Christ, the spies returned from the promised land with frightening reports, and the Israelites balked at the prospect of entering the land. God decreed that they would therefore wander in the desert for 40 years. Okay, that's like the first thing associated with with Tisha BAv, the 9th of Av. Both holy temples in Jerusalem were destroyed on this date. The first temple was burned by the Babylonians in 423 BC, and the second temple fell to the Romans in 69 AD, unleashing a period of suffering from which our nation has never fully recovered. It's like it's been an almost 2,000-year ordeal that they've been going through. Okay, later, the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Romans in 133 AD ended in defeat. The Jews of Beitar were butchered on the 9th of Av, and the Temple Mount was plowed 1 year later on the same date. Later in our history, many more tragedies happened on this day, including the 1290 expulsion of England's Jews and the 1492 banishment of all Jews from Spain. All right. Now, who knows if this is 100% accurate as far as like the temples being destroyed on these days? I don't know. But it doesn't really matter because I'm trying to see things from a Jewish point of view in how they would observe or how they would experience the second coming. Right? And I think that the Lord would work according to their understanding and may include some of these things that they do, like the observance of Tisha BAv as they're thinking of the temple. Okay. Here's rules that you're supposed to follow on that day. Okay, so during this time, so the fast begins at sunset on the 8th of Av and concludes at nightfall the following night. During this time, we do not eat or drink, wear leather footwear, bathe or wash ourselves, washing only until the knuckle when mandated by halakha, apply ointments or creams, engage in marital relations or any form of intimacy, sit on a normal height chair until katzot, the name when the sun has reached its apex, study Torah, except for the sad parts that deal with the destruction of the temples, send gifts or even greet one another. You may respond to greetings. Engage in outings, trips, or similar pleasurable activities. Wear fine or festive clothing. So it's supposed to be a big day of mourning. It's the saddest day of the year. Thinking about primarily the destruction of the temples. Okay, now this is where I think it gets kind of interesting when we think about the second coming and if the Lord would choose Tisha BAv to essentially be a day when some key event associated with the second coming happens. A lot of times when we think of the second coming, we think about the appearances of Christ, for example, to Adam on Diamond, to New Jerusalem, to Old Jerusalem, when he comes to save the Jews, and then finally to the world. But there's probably a lot of other things associated. Well, I know that there's a lot of other things associated with the second coming, namely the restoration, the building of temples, and other things. But when it comes to the Jews, could it be that the ninth of Av this year or next year or some year begins something? One, could it be the day that the Lord appears to come to the Jews? Sure, why not? That would be a really powerful day for him to show up and for them to realize that he is the Savior, um, and that he is the reason that the temples were destroyed because of their rejection of him. And we're going to look at that in just a minute. You see how like poetic that would be if he came to the Jews on Tisha BAv, or if maybe the final war begins, or the siege of Jerusalem begins on Tisha BAv, or some key event like that. Use your imagination. We're just gonna have to wait and see what actually happens, but you get what I mean. So let's look further into their minds and see how they view this date, as well as the purpose of their exile after the Romans destroyed the Second Temple. So again, on Chabad, uh, this is a different article. It says the spiritual cause of the destruction of the Second Temple. The Talmud states that needless hatred among Jews led to the Korban Bayis Sheni, the destruction of the Second Temple. So in their minds, it was, well, let me just read on. Civil war between the brothers Hyrcanus and Aristobulus also divided Jews into different factions and led to Roman rule. Eventually, Jewish society was splintered by groups that hated each other and even fought among themselves. Such strife tore apart Jewish cohesiveness, which, if it had existed, would have successfully resisted Roman infiltration into all areas of life. At the time, extremist groups of Jews known as zealots, and this is here they are. These are the guys that I keep referencing, as I think that we ourselves should avoid having zealot attitudes, whether it be toward Muslims, whether it be toward the opposite political party from what you are. Um, when it comes to intolerance toward finding common ground, or things like this. All the criticism that's been lobbed at President Nelson, I feel like, comes from this faction within our church, mostly. Maybe not entirely, but I've seen a lot of things that are just like, people can be pretty extreme. Let's just put it that way. Whether they're right or not, you can still be right, but not extreme. Does that make sense? There's people that think only in black and white terms, and that's not who we are. We look at in black and white terms, in terms of like sin and the commandments, right? Good, right and wrong, good and evil. But anyway, let's move on. Not only were they violently opposed to Roman rule, unlike Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which are good examples of how to manage yourself and how to deal with an occupation by a foreign power or by Babylon, they also murdered Jews who disagreed with the Zealots' views. In addition, Jewish criminals known as Sicarii uh, prowled the roads and extorted wealth from whomever they could. Okay, so anyway, so from their point of view, if they had been if they had not fought each other, if they had not been divided, then they would have been cohesive. And the way that this sounds, it makes it sound as though they themselves would have been able to fight off Roman rule. Although I'm not sure that that's the case. They may say, like, God would have like strengthened them if they had been cohesive. And that's actually, not a bad idea, because that sounds like Zion being of one heart and one mind, but it has to be on the principles of the gospel, right? And it can't be this whole business of thinking that you know better, that you understand the scriptures so good and you know exactly what's going to happen, that when Christ himself comes, you don't recognize him because of your own pride in your own understanding of the scriptures, instead of listening to prophets that have already clearly spoken to you and explained what was going to happen. And we have evidence of that in the Book of Mormon, which they, before Christ came, they were Old Testament people, and they had a pretty clear idea of what was supposed to happen, who Christ was, how he was going to come, right? And we don't have that so much in the Old Testament. Like it is there. Isaiah talks about it and others, but we have to question what has happened between the time that, for example, Isaiah or Jeremiah or whoever wrote their book and the oldest existing copy that we have today. So, for example, I heard recently, um, I won't say who, but I've heard recently someone say, "Well, you know, when you read the Bible, like it looks like it's been translated pretty correctly." Well, it may have based on the copies that we have access to, but where is the original book of Isaiah? Where is the original book of Ezekiel? Where is the original book of um, well, Exodus or Genesis? Where was the first one? Where is that? And how can we verify that from that time to the oldest copy that we currently have, that things haven't been changed? So that's why the Book of Mormon is really valuable, I think, because it shows you that they had a much better understanding than what you're led to believe currently. Although um, there still are things talking about Christ or alluding to him and his mission and what he's supposed to do in the Old Testament. So, um, anyway, so that is kind of a thing, you know, being Zion and being Zion based on true principles and listening to the prophets. But that's not really why there was the exile, right? The Jewish diaspora. We'll get into that in just a minute. One last thing that I wanted to read, which I think is interesting. This is also from Chabad. It says the exile after the second temple was destroyed. The exile is not just a punishment for transgressions; it serves as the means of a goal, which could not be read without first under okay, which could not be reached without first undergoing the terrible trial that is exile. In the words of the Alter Rebbe, quote, "Descent is for the purpose of ascent," end quote. The descent of the Jewish people into exile is for the purpose of reaching spiritual heights that are otherwise inaccessible. When Jews, despite the awesome tribulations and hardships of the exile, stand steadfast in their faith and exhibit a degree of self sacrifice unknown to earlier generations, they reach an inconceivably lofty level. Well, that could possibly be true, in a sense. You know, you hear in the scriptures these times where you have like these generational curses, these generational punishments, and you have to think, well, it's not, you know, the third or fourth or fifth or sixth generation's fault what their fathers did. And you know, that's true. They weren't the ones that literally, you know, broke the commandments or incurred the displeasure of God. But, you know, there could be some of these other side benefits like what he's talking about here. So that's something to think about, but still, let's continue. The goal of the exile parallels the redemption from the first exile undergone by the Jewish people, the redemption from Egyptian slavery. God had decreed that the Jews should be enslaved by the Egyptians and be afflicted by them for 400 years, and then, quote, afterward, they shall come out with great wealth, end quote. The Jews were already spiritually wealthy before the Egyptian exile, and they would certainly have been willing to forego this anticipated greater wealth if they only could be freed earlier. But God decreed otherwise. The purpose of their descent into bondage was that they should thereby garner, quote unquote, great wealth, greater than before the descent. It was worth the delay. Our present day exile has the same purpose. In the succinct words of the Yalkut Shimoni or Yirmiyahu, quote, "The lion rose," meaning Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, "in the Mazal of Ari, the 5th month of Av, and destroyed Ariel," referring to Jerusalem. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar rose on the 5th of Av and destroyed Israel. And then continuing, "so that the lion, the Holy One, should come during the Mazal of Ari and reconstruct Jerusalem." So we would read this as, let's read it from our point of view. Nebuchadnezzar on the 5th of Av destroyed Jerusalem so that Christ should come during the 5th of Av and reconstruct Jerusalem. So that's kind of interesting, because if they're kind of like if they're seeing the exile this way, that it's attached to the Holy One and him fixing things, that is what's going to happen when he comes at the second coming. They're going to, at that time, recognize him. And we will have the third temple, whether it be the one that the Jews are trying to build right now, or whether it be the BYU Jerusalem Center. I have a whole playlist about that. Don't say anything until you watch that playlist. There's more to it than I think you realize. If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch my BYU Jerusalem Center playlist. Or whether it be multiple temples in Jerusalem, I don't know. But this whole idea of the month of Av and Tisha BAv and the exile and the purpose of the exile, why it happened, and how it's going to come to an end, and Christ coming in their mind, Mashiach. And I'm going to show you some interesting things, like traditions that they have about Mashiach, which is Messiah, and the 9th of Av. So there's more. So just hang on. So, but we should remind ourselves, okay, why did this really happen? Okay, why did Tisha BAv happen? Well, that's like saying, why did July 4th happen? I'm talking about, why did the destruction of the temples happen, specifically the second temple? Well, let's look at a couple scriptures and one general conference quote. 1 Nephi 19 verses 13 to 15. "And as for those who were at Jerusalem, saith the prophet, they shall be scourged by all people because they crucified the God of Israel, and turned their hearts aside, rejecting signs and wonders and the power and glory of the God of Israel." This is really serious, and there's like a little hint here for us. Rejecting signs and wonders. And why did they reject it? Because they thought they knew exactly what was going to happen. Because they, picked through the scriptures, and they essentially invented this idea of how they thought things were going to go. And of course, instead of it being spiritual, it's on the fantastic side. It's fantastic. It's spectacular. The Romans are going to be defeated. And, it's like, what are the temporal benefits that we're going to get from this rather than the spiritual benefits? And I think that we can make that same mistake with the second coming, even though it will be spectacular, more so than his first coming. I think that we make the same mistake if we're expecting just like movie, cinematic type things, which are happening and people still are rejecting it. I mean, I cover it here on the channel, and there's still people that are like, nah, I don't think so. I don't think that's anything. You don't want to make the same mistake, guys. It seems pretty dang clear where we're at right now. Don't be one who rejects signs and wonders. Continuing, "And because they turn their hearts aside, saith the prophet, and have despised the Holy One of Israel, they shall wander in the flesh and perish, and become a hiss and a byword, and be hated among all nations. Nevertheless, when the day cometh, saith the prophet, that they no more turn aside their hearts against the Holy One of Israel, then will he remember the covenants which he made to their fathers." So he will come and he will comfort them. And it would be so fitting if that process, whether it's his actual appearance to the Jews or the beginning of his appearance or events leading up to his appearance, if that started on Tisha BAv, Okay, Matthew 24. Jesus foretells the doom of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. Verse 1. And Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came to him to shew him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said unto them, See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you, there shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. Okay? So Christ himself essentially prophesied, or you could say probably dictate. Well, I don't know, but he at least prophesied that this was going to happen. The Holy One of Israel himself said that that was going to happen, and he didn't mention anything about the division among the people or infighting or the state of not being unified, right? So we would have to depart, in our opinion, our understanding from what the Jews believe, even though we're friends with them, we love them, but that's not why it happened. Okay, and then lastly, I said General Conference. This is going to be from the Journal of Discourses, Wilford Woodruff. Ask any portion of Christendom why the ancient order of the Church of Christ is not among them. Apostles, prophets, revelations, and other gifts, and they will inform you that they were only needed in the dark ages of the world to establish the kingdom of God, but in this enlightened age are not necessary. That's funny, enlightened, quote unquote. It makes me think of a remark made by Mr. Kirkham in his grammar. He says, quote, "The Lord hung the Bible out of heaven and retired," end quote. It appears so indeed among the Gentile nations, for in process of time, the gifts and graces and powers of the kingdom of God were taken away, and men who officiated in the ancient church of God were nearly all put to death. They were slain because they endeavored to maintain it in its purity and tried with all their might to establish the principles that God had revealed to the Jews, for they were the chosen people of God, the promised seed. But they fell because they would not receive the Messiah, the Shiloh, their Savior. When they put him to death and imbrued their hands in the best blood that flowed through the lineage of Judah, they had to foot the bill. Blood was shed, the laws of God were broken, the ordinances were changed, and the priesthood of high heaven trampled upon. The Jews must therefore suffer to pay the debt they contracted. Jesus told them what would come upon them before he was taken away, for he mourned over them, saying, quote, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them. You guys, we are doing that right now. And I'm not saying like you and me. I'm talking to those of you that are just always seem to like have a issue with what the prophet's saying, whether it be the LGBTQ issue or some other, pet thing that you have going on. You're upset with the prophet. You think he's just a man. You think that he's just using his best um, judgment to run the church or whatever. Uh, when he says serious things like time is running out, you doubt it, and all these other things. You don't like Elder Uchtdorf, which is he's also a prophet, right? Prophet, seer, and revelator. You don't like him because of his political stances or whatever. It's the same behavior. We're living in an age where it's not as acceptable to go and just kill somebody. It's not as easy just to go stone people, right? Uh, it's a lot harder these days, but it's still the same mindset. And it's a spectrum, obviously. You may be on the lower end of that spectrum, but mentally stoning the prophets and what they say, um, because of anyway. Anyway, how often have I gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not? Behold, your house is left unto you desolate. End quote. Again he says to them, quote, Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! because ye build the tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Wherefore Wherefore ye be witnesses unto yourselves that ye are the children of them that which killed the prophets. Fill ye up the measure of your fathers, ye serpents, ye generation of vipers. How can ye escape the damnation of hell? Again, woe unto you, Pharisees, for ye tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs, and pass over judgment in the love of God. These ought ye have done, and not leave the other undone. End quote. He also told them that their temple would be destroyed, and not one stone be left upon another that would not be thrown down, and thus they had to suffer until the times of the Gentiles should be fulfilled. Jesus Christ lifted up his voice and spared not, for he knew what was awaiting that nation, and his heart yearned over them when he saw them as a nation rushing madly onto destruction, in sowing seed that would cause 1,000 years of sorrow and mourning to their posterity. They had their agency to act upon as seemed them good, and they became wicked and corrupt and instituted their own systems. You see that? Their own systems, their own learning, their own understanding and opinions about the Bible. And that's always, you guys, it is the worst when people say, well, I don't think that Wilford Woodruff is right. I don't think that President Nelson is right. I don't think that Elder Bednar is right. Whoever, because of your opinion, as though your opinion overrides that of an apostle or a prophet of God. Just the arrogance, the pure arrogance of some people, thinking that your opinion is better than that of an apostle or a prophet. You create your own, you institute your own systems of religion. You're basically living your own private religions. And there's a lot of that. It's okay to have opinions, but like when if there's somebody in the church that clearly states something, and there's not like any room to really question, you shouldn't go against that. When you do, you start living your own religion. And you see these people that just have all sorts of opinions, how they know how everything's going to be, and they're just so wise. They know of themselves so much. They're basically living their own private religion in detaching from the teachings of the church. Right? Someone criticized me recently saying, I think we need to be careful of idol worship of the prophets and apostles. I assume that was directed toward me. I'm not sure. The reason why I have this spreadsheet, quotes A through Z, which includes scriptures, by the way, is because you have to take all the information that has been revealed to the prophets, both in the past, in the times of the scriptures, as well as present. And it's a good idea to write their words down so that you know what has officially been said about different things. That way, you don't err when you read the scriptures and you think, oh, I think that means this. But then you realize, nope, it sure doesn't. Not according to either the scriptures. Some people even mess up with like the scriptures. Let me show you an example. There's people that think that you shouldn't watch for the signs of the times. There are people that have come on my channel saying that we shouldn't watch for the signs of the times. Okay, here we go. I have this on my common misconceptions spreadsheet. We shouldn't watch for the signs of the second coming. We should only focus on the here and now. It's clear that that person hasn't read the scriptures or forgot the many times that it says to watch for the signs. I'm just going to read a couple shorter ones. Matthew 25:13. Watch therefore, for ye know neither the day nor the hour when the Son of Man cometh. So we're supposed to watch because we don't know when it's going to happen. So we're supposed to always be ready and watch. It says watch. Luke 12:37. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Revelation 16:15. Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watcheth, and keepeth his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame. D&C 45:44. And then shall they look for me, and behold, I will come, and they shall see me in the clouds of heaven, clothed with power and great glory, with all the holy angels. And he that watches not for me shall be cut off. So it would be a good idea for everybody, all of you, to whatever system you want to use, record the words of the prophets and stop inserting your own words over them in your mind. When you find out the answer to a gospel question, write it down, save it somewhere. And there's really no excuse nowadays when we have computers and it's so easy to save information. You can do it in a Word document, you can do it in a spreadsheet like me, you could do it in emails, you could do whatever. There's like a million different options. Write it down. And then you can refer back to it when someone asks you a question. Well, where did you get this idea? You can go right to where you found it and give them multiple examples. You know, someone just asked me yesterday, you keep saying that when everyone's translated in the millennium, they're going to be changed in the twinkling of an eye at the age of 100 from translated to resurrected. Where do you get that doctrine from? So I went and found it, and I added this to my quotes A through Z. Okay, I put it under 100 age. That's the name of the row. And I got the scriptures as well as a few confirming statements from Joseph Fielding Smith and Bruce R. McConkie. So, but that's the problem. People are either lazy, like they pridefully think that they are so smart. All they have to do is just kind of like skim through the scriptures, and then they understand what's happening. And then when you give them actual doctrine, they confront you about it because they have a different idea of how things are supposed to go that they concocted from their lazy reading of the scriptures or whatever. So sometimes that happens, or people are just delusional and they really want things to play out a certain way. I could go into the whole concept of narcissism, a whole group of people that are completely detached from reality in the first place and don't care about reality. They have certain goals and things that they're trying to achieve, certain facades that they're trying to. There's any number of reasons. But the main thing is people relying on themselves in putting so much importance on their own opinion when things have already been said about whatever it is that you have an opinion about. So you would probably do well before you dig your heels in on your opinion. Go see if a prophet or an apostle has already spoken about that. And then be flexible and willing to accept the truth when you read it. Especially when multiple people have already spoken about it. This is not your church, and it's not their church. It's the Church of Jesus Christ, and he speaks through his authorized servants. Okay, so getting back to this. Jesus told them they would be dispersed among the Gentiles and be trodden down and afflicted by them until the times of the Gentiles should be accomplished. We understand from the scriptures that have been referred to from time to time in this desk that the Lord will set his hand again to gather Israel. We heard this subject treated upon a few Sabbaths ago and what would take place in the last dispensation, even in the dispensation of the fullness of times. Now, this is a very interesting thing I didn't know until today. This is a Jewish tradition about Tisha BAv and Messiah. So they say this is on Orthodox Union, and it says the Beit HaMikdash in the Mashiach. So the Beit HaMikdash, that's it's one of the words for the temple. Okay, it's like the if I remember right, it's the actual like building that encloses the sanctuary and the Holy of Holies. So that in the Messiah. According to Jewish tradition, the Messiah is born on Tisha BAv. According to Rambam or Maimonides, this is a acronym for Maimonides, one of the medieval Jewish sages. It is the Mashiach who will lead the Jewish people in the building of the third temple, or the third temple, that is to never be destroyed. Now, why would I find this interesting? Because we have our own belief of when Christ was born. And that belief that's been repeated many times is on April 6th of the year I keep doing that. The year 1 BC. I'm not going to go over that whole thing, but if you're wondering, oh, how do you get that? I have it right here under row 11, and it's been said many, 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 many times. That is our church's belief and doctrine. And the most recent one to support that is Elder David A. Bednar, April 2014 General Conference. Okay, so we believe that it happened in April, which is not anywhere near the month of Av, because we're in Av right now. Well, are we? I just want to make sure of that. Yes, today, the 21st of July, is the 3rd of Av. Okay, so this is not anywhere near April, so why would that even matter? Well, it's because they're expecting an appearance of the Messiah on this day. To them, in their mind, it would be his first coming. So they're expecting him to come the first time on Tisha BAv. So if Christ came as part of the second coming, his appearance to the Jews on Tisha BAv, maybe that would be very fitting. Maybe this is something that is gearing their minds toward Christ when he comes. They're like, oh my gosh, it's Tisha BAv. And look, it's Christ. Like, he's a grown man, but this is him. And he came on Tisha BAv. So it could be something like that. All the prophets prophesied concerning Achorit Hayamim, the end of days. Yeshayahu, perhaps most beautifully. That's the name for Isaiah. And it shall come to pass in the end of days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the top as the tops of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow into it. Now that's interesting because you might remember that they just added this to Temple Square in front of the temple. This inscription, Isaiah 2, verse 2. This is the King James version, of course. And it shall come to pass that in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the tops of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. I've heard. Well, I'm not going to get into that. Okay, so that's just that's interesting, right? Now this has been the case ever since temples have been reestablished on the earth and constructed. But that made me think about that. Here's some more. This is from Safaria. This is under an article called Destruction and Rebirth, Tisha BAv and the Birth of Mashiach. And it just shows some examples here where in the Talmud and other places, that's where this tradition comes from. So for example, if I could ever find one, let me do it this way. The reason for saying Kiddush Levana specifically on Motzei Tisha BAv is because that is the time Mashiach was born, and the renewal of the moon represents that the Jewish people will return to a renewed state, which they definitely will. That's like an interesting thing. They will when the second coming happens. They're going to be renewed. They're going to be brought back into the fold. They base their approval on what we learned on Agadita, that the Mashiach was born on Tisha BAv. So it's just like it's repeated a bunch of different times. So here's like the original sources for where that idea comes from. North African Jewish customs. Women wash their hair and dress in festive clothes in honor of the Mashiach, who was born on Tisha BAv. All right. Now, let's get into what's going on in Israel right now, because this situation is still ongoing, and here's the protesters making their way down the highway from Tel Aviv all the way to Jerusalem. Um, it looks like they are determined to do this. So, and then I want to end this with this final article. Again, on the eve of Tisha BAv, Israel risks an unforgivable process of self-destruction. So, just interesting things, Could anything happen on this Tisha BAv? Yeah, anything could happen anytime. Who the heck knows? You just have to wait and see. Could it happen next year? Yeah, possibly. But things are getting really crazy in Israel. So I have this. We're going to talk about Air Force reservists, and there's some detailed numbers here to look over. Okay, as tensions boil, thousands of protesters march in self-styled pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Uh, Thousands of demonstrators were continuing their march toward Jerusalem Friday in protest of the government's judicial overhaul, planning to reach the capital prior to the Knesset beginning its final votes Sunday on the first bill of the package expected to pass. Just a quick summary if you don't know what this is about. Israel doesn't have a constitution. Its laws are based on the Declaration of Independence. And so they haven't worked out a lot of kinks. And I don't know why the answer isn't just, hey, let's have a constitutional convention. It's been 75 years now. Let's go ahead and do it finally. But no, they're doing this thing to try, and I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but essentially Netanyahu, which is backed by the ultra conservative Orthodox Jews. Well, no, I'm going to say the ultra Orthodox Jews, those that are really religious. They don't like some of the things that the judicial branch has been doing. They want to limit its power. I'm not going to go into whether that's right or wrong. I'm more focused on the effect that this is having on Israel. So they're planning to get there before the final votes, and this would only be like the first change to the judicial. It wouldn't be like the entire thing. It's like one of the beginning bills. The march comes. The march has become the signature event of the protest movement since it began in Tel Aviv on Tuesday evening. By the way, this has been going on for 28 or 29 weeks. So this is just talking about the most recent flare-up. At the end of the latest day of mass protests against legislation. It will culminate on Saturday outside the Knesset, where organizers plan to set up tents and stay put for an indefinite amount of time as the coalition readies to pass into law a ban on courts striking down governmental and ministerial decisions based on their quote-unquote reasonableness. And you can see where that would be an issue. From what I understand, there's this kind of loose term if something is reasonable or not. That's all that the judicial needs to strike something down from the government or whatever. So they're wanting to be okay, we need to not do that anymore. We need to define these things a little bit better. The total distance is some 60 kilometers or 37 miles, with participants marching in limited sections every day, mostly in mornings and evenings due to the intense summer heat, and camping out tents at night. On Thursday evening, they gathered for their evening trek at Lehigh Forest. I thought that was interesting. In 87.8 degree heat Fahrenheit. Here they are. Okay. Here they are again and again and again and again. And that's it for this article. Okay, 1,142 Air Force reservists to end volunteer duty in protest of judicial overhaul. Okay, now this is where things get a little They get a little hairy at this point. When you have military personnel, and you might be like, well, they're just reservists. Well, the reserves are what make up the majority of the Israeli military. So it's not like the same as in the United States. This is more, there's more consequence to this. You can't, you can't minimize it because they're just the reserves. Okay, quote. This is from military spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, responding to the letter, saying the IDF was looking into the signatories and would examine the meanings accordingly. The security of the citizens of Israel rests on the standing in reserve service members. These are the best of our people, and we are full of appreciation for their contribution. The IDF recently received a letter signed by over 1,100 initials of reservists in the Air Force. The IDF is checking the details and will examine the meanings accordingly. The IDF continuously monitors the situation, examines the readiness, and reflects the implications to the political echelon. Okay, end quote. He said the IDF's position on the threats to refuse to show up for duty has not changed. Quote, not reporting for reserve duty harms the IDF and the security of the state of Israel, he said, adding that in recent days, quote, damage to the cohesion of the military is already evident, the repair of which will take a long time. That's not good for Israel. Again, like I've said many times before, a country that is essentially surrounded by a world that doesn't want them to exist anymore. That's a problem when your security is compromised. Continuing, several of the signatories who spoke to Channel 12 News anonymously said they were, quote unquote, brokenhearted to take the step, but that Israel was facing, quote, an unprecedented crisis of trust in the leadership dragging us into the abyss, end quote. Well, I don't think that helps. You think that's going to help? I don't know. I don't think that's going to help. These other people that don't have jobs or people that can afford to step away from work, fine. But military, no. Doctors, medical personnel, no. And then continuing, we've got to fight for a country that our children will want to live in. Then report back to duty. How about that? A leadership with unbridled power and an extreme agenda. We lived through all the governments and all the crises, and we never went for such a move, he noted. Another pilot told Army Radio that, quote, we understand the security implications, but we also understand the enormous risks of a regime change. The letter was signed by 235 pilots, 98 transport pilots, 89 helicopter pilots, 173 drone operators, 124 air traffic control officers, 167 Israeli Air Force headquarters staff, 91 training staff, 80 members of the elite search and rescue unit, 669. That's probably like the equivalent of United States pararescue in the Air Force, and 85 members of the Shaldog Commando Unit. On Thursday, Major General Bar said the Israeli Air Force was continuing to operate as usual despite calls by reservists to not show up for volunteer duty in protest of the overhaul, but added that the current discourse was causing great damage that will take, quote unquote, years to fix. Awesome. Quote, the harsh statements that have been made toward the Army and the Air Force standing in reserves in recent days have no place in society, and they have caused great damage to the cohesion of the force. I strongly condemn them, he said. Meanwhile, defense officials and politicians on both sides of the aisle have warned that the mass refusals could make Israel more vulnerable to outside threats. Oh, wonderful. And the readiness of the military, particularly the Israeli Air Force, would be negatively impacted. Reservists, especially members of the Israeli Air Force, are a key part of the Army's routine activities. Defense officials have said pilots could harm their competency by taking breaks from their frequent training exercises, and it would take a significant amount of time to restore their flying abilities. Yeah, because you have to keep practicing. I'm assuming that's what that's talking about. You keep training, practicing. You can't take breaks, or else you lose what you've gained through the training and practicing. The IDF appears to be facing an unprecedented threat, with thousands of reservists calling to end their volunteer reserve duty. During the 2005 Israeli disengagement from the Gaza Strip, the military anticipated a large wave of insubordination by members of the standing army, although few ended up actually refusing to carry out the evacuation orders. The military has said that it would discipline or potentially dismiss active duty soldiers who refuse to show up for duty when ordered to, but stressed that no action would be taken against reservists who only threatened not to show up. And the thing about this is okay, here's another thing I'm not so sure that they're thinking about, or maybe they are. When you say that you're a military reservist, you're a pilot or something, and you think it's a good idea to protest and step away from duty, and you get a bunch of people on board. The thing about that is you will definitely be joined by people that genuinely think that that's a good idea, but then it creates an excuse for other people that are maybe just dissatisfied with their job. They want to quit anyway. They don't care. And so they have like an excuse. They think that maybe by joining this big group of people that are stepping away from duty, maybe they can just join in on that and then shield themselves a little bit. Maybe the consequences won't be as severe as if they just, quit the military. I don't know what the rules are, in the Israeli military and the reserves, but I'm assuming that it's probably like any other military where you can't just quit the military. Uh, People that do so, they're considered AWOL, and there's consequences for that. Um, so there could be, in other words, there could be opportunists that are just like, oh yeah, okay, I'll do this too, not because I care about the protest, but because I'm dissatisfied with work, and hey, this is my ticket out or whatever. Something like that could be happening. Okay, the final article. On the eve of Tisha BAv, Israel risks an unforgivable process of self-destruction. Well, now this is interesting. This big division, the weakening of Israel, both on a societal level as well as a security level. It's been 75 years. There's the whole concept of about the eighth decade, that Israel has never survived as a unified kingdom for more than 8 decades. I have quotes about that. I'm not going to go over that right now. Just look it up. Look up the curse of the eighth decade if you're curious, and you'll find all sorts of statements about it. Okay, there's Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, this is like an opinion piece, of course. Prime Minister, this is to like understand the other side, or the protesters' side, their point of view. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who, on regaining office in December, immediately set in motion this entire unforgivable process of destroying Israel's democratic checks and balances by neutering the High Court, seems more determined than ever to see it through. His fateful phone conversation with Joe Biden on Monday, according to his own office's readout, he told the U.S. president that the first piece of judicial overhaul legislation, barring the courts from using the legal barometer of quote-unquote reasonableness to review government and ministerial decisions, would be approved by the Knesset next week. So I'm guessing that it sounds like that's on Sunday, if I'm understanding the previous articles correctly. So just the day after tomorrow. The Constitution, Law, and Justice Committee indeed advanced it on Wednesday night for its final parliamentary readings amid particularly acrimonious coalition opposition feuding. That was kind of a showy sentence. Here they are. And Netanyahu has single-mindedly followed his devastating overhaul path for the first week in his Likud far-right and ultra-Orthodox government took office. When he paused the bills in March, because there was a pause, they were wanting to do this earlier this year, continuing, it was out of necessity rather than consensual magnanimity, because his sacking of Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for daring to publicly oppose the legislative blitz had unleashed new heights of public opposition in a brief display of wariness from a minority of the coalition, who have since largely fallen into line. So you remember that if you watch my other videos. Gallant, the defense minister, unbeknownst to Netanyahu, gave like a televised press conference, um, calling for like a halt or a pause on the whole thing. Netanyahu fired him, but then it just made things even worse with the protesters and people going on strike. And so he's still the defense minister. But things have been paused kind of all the way up until now. So the first flare up was earlier this year around the time of Passover, and then it's kind of been on the down low since that time up until now. So this is like round two. I feel like these are contractions, because I think that what we're seeing here is a major event because it's affecting Israeli security, and it's also it seems to be tearing the nation apart in a sense. As its members' own declared legislative plans indicate, the coalition parties aim to discriminate in favor of the ultra-Orthodox, including by excusing the community from national service, meaning that if you're ultra-Orthodox Jewish in Israel, you don't have to serve in the military, whereas everybody else, it's an obligation. Legitimize discrimination on the grounds of religion, impose restrictions on media, reduce women's rights, and more. So this is why they're up in arms about this. Combined with plans for the annexation of the West Bank without equal rights for Palestinians, the Zionist miracle of democratic, tolerant Jewish Israel will be no more. Now this part right here is a little bit more intense and worth thinking about. Would they go ahead and annex the West Bank? Would this pave the way for that? That's what I was originally thinking when this all started up, is like, are they trying to make it possible to do things like that, to make drastic moves, like take more land or take land, or maybe change things on the Temple Mount? Is that the end goal? Is that the end game? I did a video a while ago where there was a key rabbi that told Benjamin Netanyahu that he was the Messiah ben Yosef, or the Messiah from Joseph, the one that would prepare the way for Messiah, and he told him that he would be the one to hand the keys over to Messiah. So if he takes that seriously, and if other ultra-Orthodox do, yeah, maybe they do have some plans in mind that could really bring on Armageddon and Gog and Magog and the siege of Jerusalem. I don't know. The potential process of self-destruction coming to a head right now, on the eve of Tisha BAv, when the Jewish nation recalls the destruction of its ancient temples amid internal intolerance and infighting, is simply unforgivable. The fresh memory of the horrors that can befall the Jewish people without a country of its own and without unity and will to defend it should be more than sufficient to prompt a halt to the self-inflicted assault on national cohesion. The Jewish people needs this country and needs it to function in something close to harmony. I mean, I don't know really what to think. I'm no expert, but again, why don't they just call for a a constitutional convention and finally draft a constitution for Israel and get all these things worked out, and pattern their constitution off of the United States Constitution or whatever. Most constitutions in the world are patterned after the U.S. Constitution. So I don't know. Netanyahu was elected, and it seems like everything's going through the legal way. So I feel like the protesters are probably more at fault, because you don't just try and like overpower things when those that were elected are in power. That defeats democracy, doesn't it? At the same time, those that are pushing through this bill, you also can't just, you should probably take this into account and figure something out. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. In his carefully calibrated speech to a joint session of the U.S. Congress on Wednesday, President Isaac Herzog did his best to exude optimism while also highlighting what we have to lose. He hailed the quote, protesters taking to the streets all across the country to emphatically raise their voices and fervently demonstrate their point of view, end quote. Does that include the military reservists and the doctors and blocking highways and all this nonsense? This guy, he's below, his position is below Netanyahu. The prime minister is really the position of power. Anyway, he addressed Congress, and he acknowledged that, quote, the momentous debate in Israel is painful and deeply unnerving because it highlights the cracks within the whole. Okay, and then this article ends with, it's still not too late, since even a handful of those Likud members who recognize where Israel is headed could insist upon a new and genuine effort at consensus. It's still not too late for Netanyahu himself to bring meaning to his hollowed promise to serve as prime minister for all Israelis. But with every passing hour, the hope diminishes, the divide widens, and the danger grows. Yikes. So, what's going to happen over the next few days? They actually are doing this crazy march from Tel Aviv, blocking highways as they do so. Is this just one of the many things in the past that have just been a show? Just people acting poorly, or is this going to turn into something else? When this first flared up the first time earlier this year, there was talk of civil war, and that's been brought up a couple times more recently. Could that actually happen? I don't know, but I guess we better watch this next week and see, do things get even worse at that point? Are we going to have another shutdown of Ben Gurion Airport? Are we going to have a shutdown of public transportation? Are we going to have a shutdown of all these different things? And more importantly, is this going to be the moment that Israel's enemies take advantage of when they're at their lowest, their most divided point in their history, and militarily their weakest point, with people stepping away from duty? So we'll just have to see. If anything happens, I'll make a video about it. But Tisha BAv, that might be a date to look at and think about, as we look at it from a Jewish perspective, and how it would be pretty dramatic if Christ showed up on Tisha BAv, or some other key event happened on Tisha BAv in connection with the second coming. All right, that's going to be it for this one. If you haven't already, please make sure to subscribe, like this video if you liked it, leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. Also make sure to share it, and I'll talk to you guys later.